Could appreciate if everybody could go on mute until we have question time and all the rest of it. So, because that way we won't have any extraneous background noise. And we'll just give it a minute, another minute or so to get going. I'd like to also introduce Carolyn Burgess, who's also on the LOOR Safety Committee and runs the rigging shops. So she might be able to answer any questions about what's available or not available in the Canadian marketplace. Okay, we'll get going. For anybody who would like to later review this or look at the slides, they'll be posted and I'll be sending out a link to them. Just a reminder that this is going to be recorded, so your continued participation proves your inclusion in the recording. Some webinar ground rules. If possible, just stay on mute. If you want to have a question or whatever, just raise your virtual Zoom hand. We don't have a lot of people here tonight, so we can probably do it during the session rather than waiting to the end, but would encourage everybody to remain on mute. You can raise your virtual Zoom hand either through the raise hand through reactions or down below. And you can toggle the microphone on and off by using the space bar or the microphone icon to mute and unmute. Many of you are familiar with LOOR. We run a series of offshore races, 3 of which are overnight, which are category 3. And one of the Lake Ontario 300 is jointly organized with the Great Lakes Solo Society, which is the 300 is their solo challenge on the Lake Ontario. So if more information is available there. Agenda, I'm just going to go over the purpose, the parts, how they fit together, wrap up, and questions. Purpose is to provide a high-level overview of what we mean by DSC, AIS, and how they can contribute to safety-wise sailing. What you need to participate in the Category 3 events, and what's recommended, so that you have understanding of that and how this ties into tonight's presentation. One of the things to do, we think, with your equipment, know the equipment you have. Review it periodically. If you need it in an emergency and you don't know how to use it, it's not going to help you. So you may want to be able to practice it as much as possible. Some things you can't really practice. You may want to test the equipment. So there's usually instructions on how to do that. And some of the devices have a test mode. And this is important to remember whether your device is in test mode or real mode. Because I've heard of a story of a person going overboard, had the AIS DSC device, and after an hour treading water realized that it was in test mode and finally flipped it to real mode and was able to be recovered. So you need to understand how your equipment works and what are the limitations. And we're going to get to that a little bit later. This is a book that I used. I don't know if Carolyn's carries it, but I know that other places do. And it goes over in depth about AIS and DSC. For the LOOR Category 3 events, you need a 25-watt radio, and it must be DSC compatible if installed after 2015. You also need a second radio handheld receiver, and that should be in your grab bag or emergency container. And there's a second radio receiver for radio bulletins, but that can be the handheld device. The other thing that you need, both through the OSRs, the Offshore Special Regulations, and through the notice of race is if your radio is DSC compatible, you need a Maritime Mobile Service Identity, MMSI. The important thing about this is one of the few things that in sailing is absolutely free. There is no cost to get it. And there's a link that you can see when you get the slides on how to do that. So I'm amazed that more people haven't got an MMSI, and I would encourage everybody that doesn't have one to get one if they're participating in an overnight race under LOOR. Highly recommended is an AIS transponder. We'll get what that means a little later. It's not required, but it's an excellent idea. And also is a man overboard device that's also recommended. And we'll be discussing both of these a little later, and that's what the purpose of this presentation is. Okay, and there's some limitations on this, and we'll be talking about that. I appreciate if everybody could go on mute if you're not asking a question. So the parts that we need that make up all of this are the VHF radio, GMDSS, AIS, and the man overboard devices. The VHF radio has been around for a long time. It's one component of the spectrum for marine communications around the world. VHF, medium frequency, which is the SSB, and the high frequency. The emergency channel is 16 in Canada and the US, and 16 is also the calling channel, and that's 9 in the US as well. If you're an operator of the radio, you need to have a restricted operator certificate marine, and that includes operating any of the handheld devices. The various places give courses. We'll talk about that a little bit later. If you're a pleasure craft in Canada, you no longer need a station license, so that's saving you some money. However, because of legal problems, if you enter US waters and you have a VHF radio aboard, you do need a station license. Now, if you're a US boat in US waters, you don't need the station license. But if the US boat comes to Canada, it needs the station license. This is because under the International Telecommunications Union regulations, Canada and the US haven't signed a joint agreement to waive that for boats from either country entering the other country's water. Non-pleasure craft may still need a station license. And we may have in the Lake Ontario, sometimes we actually do, but have non-pleasure craft if they're carrying people who have paid to be on the trip, depending on how that's been done. The operator certificate and station license are managed by Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, used to be known as Industry Canada. There's the link to the website. They manage the station licenses directly, and they've outsourced the operator certificate to places like the Canadian Power and Sail Squadron, Sail Canada, and other not-for-profit or profit schools and organizations. Just an aside, if you have your operator's license for marine that does not cover amateur radio frequencies and equipment, you need to get that license as well. Global Maritime Distress and Safety System. This came in about the turn of the century. It's amazing what we talk about that. It was really developed for commercial vessels on the high seas and cascaded down to pleasure crafts. A lot of the stuff that's in GMDSS is not relevant to the sailors on the Great Lakes, but you might be interested in having them or understanding that if you're cruising or racing on the ocean. So the components of them are the digital selective calling addition to VHF radios, the emergency position indicating radio beacon, the EPIRB. They make use of a satellite system that was put in place partly to do with this. There's a search and rescue transponder, and then there's other things that really don't affect the sailors on the Great Lakes, but they are a way of getting information, safety, weather, etc. So a NavTech is a way of getting text information. A lot of this was developed before the new internet and texting and the rest of it. And there's a satellite component, which is MRSAT. Again, if you have any questions or comments, just raise your virtual Zoom hand and we'll deal with it. They have divided the sea up into areas. A1 is what is basically 20 to 30 miles from the coast, and that would apply to all of the Great Lakes. So I've just listed the equipment that would be included there. It's really only mandated for commercial type ships, but it gives you an idea what's there. Area 2 is in about 100 nautical miles offshore, because that's where the medium frequency SSB radios come into play. A3 is everything except A1 and A2 and the Arctic, because the MRSAT satellites don't cover the Arctic and the Antarctic. So they have a special case for that. Now, the Marine Mobile Service Identity, think of it as a telephone number for your boat. It's a 9-digit number. Again, it's free. You just have to go to the website, plug in the information about your radio and your boat, and you get your MMSI number. The leading digit tells you whether it's a ship group, coastal station, or a group of coastal stations, search and rescue aircraft. 200 to 799 are the country codes, not assigned alphabetically, but assigned geographically. 8 indicates that you've got a handheld VHF radio that has DSC capability, so you can get that now. And 9 is sort of where the miscellaneous stuff, where they've started adding MSIs for various features like the MOB devices that we'll talk about later. And the other one is 998, which is aids to navigation. They're coming up with AIS-based aids to navigation. So rather than physically putting a buoy out there, they have an AIS transmitter broadcasting a signal that shows up on your chart plotter saying that this is where the buoy is, even though there's nothing there. Now, that while it's not part of the GMDSS, it came around at the same time, is automatic identification system. Places in the world for shipping like the English Channel were getting kind of crowded, and they developed the special traffic system for their lanes. And what they needed to have is a mechanism so boats would know what other boats are doing. So an AIS transmitter broadcasts information about the vessel, its position, and how fast it's going through the water. On the commercial ships, if they make a turn, it'll broadcast that. Then you have an AIS receiver, and it receives the broadcast messages. It can display them as either text or on your chart plotter, and it can calculate things such as the closest point of approach or time of the closest point of approach. So you find out how much of a danger there is of a collision. Some of the devices may generate an alert depending on the information messages received and the calculations done. If your close of approach is too close, you can get it to tell you, hey, worry about this. So that's one of the key points about the AIS system. As mentioned, it was developed for crowded situations, rolled out in the 90s. And it's mandated by the International Maritime Organization, which is the governing body for maritime stuff around the world for specific commercial vessels. It's evolved into different classes of AIS transmitters, and some of them are work for pleasure crafts, both in functionality and cost. And creative use of AIS is developed over time. And somebody had the bright idea, hey, we don't need to have a physical buoy out there. We just send out this radio signal, and it'll magically appear on the ship's display, say, or radar display, hey, there's a buoy here. Another one that we probably don't really have to worry about is the search and rescue transponder. Again, it was designed for ships out at sea. Basically, what happens is if search and rescue vessel or plane is searching, it'll send out a radar signal, usually on X-band, which is a 9 gigahertz. And when this device picks it up, it'll amplify the signal and send it back. So you get a big something on the radar display that says that's where they are, and it points you in the right direction. So if you go to the YouTube video, that gives you a better understanding of what it's there. Again, it's I don't think I would have ever seen them around on the Great Lakes. Now here are the class AIS classes. Class A is the one for commercial ships. The scheme is the mechanism so that they can be all broadcasting on the same radio frequency without interrupting each other. Just put that there for completeness. And if you want to, you can go look them up. The other thing is to look at the rate of transmission. In the class B, the original class B for a pleasure craft, it can get to every 3 minutes, etc. So it may not be that quick, so it's not instantaneous. The safety text messages could all be transmitted and received by class A, and BSO, which is a new class. Class B, which is the one really for pleasure craft, the transmit is optional, and you have pre-canned text. There are application-specific messages. Again, the class B can't send them. And then there's the transmitted data. So in both class Bs, the rate of turn, navigation status, destination, ETA, draft, and the International Maritime vessel number aren't transmitted. And you probably don't really need that anyway for the pleasure crafts. But that's just to give you an idea what they are. One of the things that is important that I didn't put on here is there's a difference in power. The class B is a very low power system. So that comes into play when we get into the next discussion. They also use basically the same range of frequencies of the VHF radio. So that means, excuse me, they're only line of sight. And they can use the same antenna for the radio and AIS, especially if you're receive only, but you got to be very careful and would talk to whoever you're getting the equipment from or the installer to find out if this works, because it runs into problems if you try to save money and only have one antenna. The other drawback is that the VHF radio antenna is designed around the channel 16 for optimal signal, and the AIS is not there, so you may lose a little bit. The other thing to think about is that it's the time, it represents the position at time of transmission, so not the current position. So if you have a vessel that with a class B transmitter running at 30 knots, it'll move a quarter of a nautical mile between the required broadcast times. So it was over there, not here, because it could be a couple of minutes ago. Then you may hear about AIS on satellites and all the rest of it. Well, how does that work? Because AIS is line of sight. Well, low Earth orbit satellites are in line of sight when they're overhead. So what really comes into play is whether the transmitter has enough power to reach the satellite. Class A's do, Class B's don't. So that's why it was key to understand about the power of the transmitter you have. There are several services on the internet that are free that will show AIS signals. Here's one for marine traffic. And obviously all these boats out on the middle of the ocean aren't line of sight anywhere on land. So they're picked up by the satellite, and if you actually clicked on, that's what it says. What marine traffic and the other companies do is they make arrangements with various people to install an AIS receiver in various locations. It collects the information and it sends it to the marine traffic, who then processes it and presents it on the internet. So I use this from time to time to help track where boats are in the various Lake LOOR events. And you'll find out that it works great. And then a boat will disappear for 3 or 4 hours because there's holes in their coverage, or their transmitters aren't reaching the various marine traffic receive stations. But it does help. Again, if there's a reference link, you can install marine traffic on your PC or on your phone to get information. Man overboard devices. The devices that are used VHF radio, GMDSS, DSS, or AIS, or in this later. There are other types of devices out there, but we're not going to go out in this session because they're not really integrated in the overall maritime communication system, but they may be of value. So you could consider them. So how do they all fit together? Let us think about the following emergency scenarios. A boat's in distress, it sank, people overboard. How would these electronics tools help? Okay, if you have a vessel in distress, hopefully you were able to send out a message beforehand, or you have the red button on your radios. Have everybody on their show of hands, everybody who knows how to use the little red button on their radio. Okay, that's good, because that'll send out a signal that can be received by the Prescott Coast Radio anywhere on Lake Ontario. Also, if you're in Canada, you can hit *16 on your cell phone and it'll reach the Coast Guard. But that's only in Canada. And you have to be connecting to the cell system in Canada. So this doesn't work too well in places like Niagara on the lake, because if you're on the US side down by the water, you're liable to be connected to the towers in Canada. And if you're down by the water in Canada, you're liable to be connected to the towers in the US. So you got to watch for things like that. Also, there are the visual signals. Make sure you have the right ones that you'll get accepted by the police when they stop you. Transport Canada has now authorized electronic flares. They're very restrictive. There's only certain models. They have to be approved by the US Coast Guard and then have to be packaged with instructions in English and French. So not any old electronic flare that people sell will meet Transport Canada's requirements. And what Transport Canada and the US Coast Guard have approved are not lasers. So they don't have the problem that lasers do, that if a plane or a helicopter comes close and sees that it's a laser, they'll right back off because they're dangerous to the pilot, because if they get in their eyes, they can't see where they're going and all the rest of it. But what's been approved by the US and Canadian Coast Guard are not lasers. Okay, your vessel sank. Hopefully you were able to send out a message before and it was received. If your vessel sank, their winds and currents will move you away from wherever the vessel sank. The impact is different on the boats, a raft, or an individual. So you'll be moving away from where that position was transmitted. And so the longer it takes you to be rescued, the further you've traveled. Jeff, you have a question?
No, I was just, that was my response from the your earlier question.
Okay, no problem. So for Lake Ontario, both the Canadian and US Coast Guard have tools that they can plot where the distress signal was received from. It takes into information about the winds and current, the type of the object, whether it's a person, an upside down sailboat, whatever, and it can give probabilities of drift. This is where the EPIRB comes in. So if you go overboard, your vessel sinks, the EPIRB is automatically launched and it'll be sending out a continuous signal. And therefore, as it drifts, it'll be broadcasting or being able to calculate a new position. There has been an evolution in standards. The first EPIRBs that came out didn't have a GPS in them. You would have to have multiple passes of the satellite to determine your position, and that could take 2 or 3 hours, which isn't too good on Lake Ontario to be rescued, but that's more been addressed. Again, these have been designed for high sea vessels, but they still work on the Great Lakes. But what is important is if you have an EPIRB, make sure you get it registered. And there is a few gotchas, especially if you buy a used one. Let's say you buy a used one or a cheap one in the US, it's going to have a US number identification in it. So when the broadcast goes off, it'll send it to the centers in the US, where then they may have to redirect you. So make sure you understand what type of EPIRB you're buying, where it's from, and all the rest of it, and get it properly registered. Otherwise, it's not going to do you any good. I was down at the Joint Rescue Coordination Center, which is also the place that receives the EPIRB signals for Canada, and they were tracking somebody whipping along the highway in BC at 60 miles an hour because their EPIRB had gone off. So there's a real problem with false alarms on that. So that's why there's test modes and a whole bunch of other things you need to know if you have an EPIRB to use them properly. Now, so this is similar to an EPIRB, but basically it operates on the same frequency, but it's designed for when you go overboard, you can push the button or it'll automatically go off, but it does not meet the carriage requirements for an EPIRB. The battery isn't as long. It doesn't necessarily automatically start. There's a few other things, but it's good if you go overboard because it'll send out a signal and the search and rescue people will know where you are. But the boat you're on doesn't know where you are. So that's a minor problem. But anyway, if you wanted more information, there's a link there. So now we come to these type of devices. And I'm only using this one as an illustration for the discussion. There may be other ones out there that you would like to look at, but what it is, it has an AIS transmitter. It has the digital selective calling transmitter, and it's designed to be fitted on a life jacket. So sounds great. Well, minor problem. It has a confusing situation by country. For some unknown reason that I haven't fathomed, the regulations are completely different in countries. So what they can do. In Canada, it can only act as an AIS transmitter. The same in France, Denmark, and Latvia. I have no idea why those countries are like that. In the US, it can do AIS and a DSC individual distress call. And it can do a group call after 30 minutes. So what this means is when you buy this device, you download some software and that's used to program the device. So it's what you program in it is an MMSI number, not the MMSI number of the device, but the MMSI number of the boat that you're on that you're going to fall off of. So basically what that means is this device can act like ET and call home when you've gone overboard, except they can't do that in Canada. It can only send out an AIS signal. So this, and the way they determine how to do it is that they look at the digit of the MMSI number, they tells you the number between 200 and 799, and they look up, I'm not sure whether it's in the software that does the programming or in the device itself, what they can do or can't do based on that. So that if you're a Canadian and you get a Canadian MMSI number, when you program it, it says, oh, it can only do AIS. So that means that if a person buys this device in the US, programs in their US MMSI number, so it knows what to do, it can send out AIS and a DSC, individual distress call, sails into Canada, it'll do it. So you're not supposed to do that in Canada, but the device will do it. Yeah, and if you buy the device in Canada, it'll only send out an AIS signal if you program in your AIS MSI number. And if you sail into the US waters, that's all it'll do. So now if you're a sailor in Niagara Falls or in that area, Niagara on the Lake or Youngstown, and you hop back and forth across the border and reprogram it for the MMSI number that you're sailing on that night, it'll act completely differently. Again, I have no idea how the regulations came about like that, but this is one of those gotchas that you need to know that, yeah, the MOB1 device and similar devices can send a DSC to stress out, but not in Canada if they're following the law. What you really like to do is something like this. Is it does AIS, the DSC call back to the boat you fell off, and then you can manually push a button and it'll send out an all ships distressed alert, so that you know when you get that irritating noise on the VHF radio that there's a mayday somewhere, that's what'll happen, but not in Canada. So this is where this all came from. So these are great devices, but you have to understand how they're going to operate in the waters that you're in. So again, some tips. You need to understand how your equipment works. Like this, it's not obvious to many people that the MODB device might operate differently in the US and Canada, depending on the MMSI number programmed into it. Practice your equipment so you know how to use it in an emergency, and periodically test it. It's not going to work too well if you realize, oh, the battery's dead in my PLB or MAB device. So then also know your pitfalls and limitations. So now have any questions or comments? Has anybody got any of these devices? Again, if you don't have your MMSI number, it comes in usually useful to, if you want to call another boat, you know their MMSI number. They usually have the capability of a little phone book on your radio, so you can put in all your friends in there. So if you want to call them up, you just select them out of the phone book, push the button, and it'll make a call to them. The other thing I discovered that was very useful was that when I was visiting Prescott Coast Guard Radio, is that people, how about ever had the problem that somebody's mic has got stuck on channel 16 and you can't do anything. So the operators down there will look to see if there's that it might be a boat with a AIS on it transmitting. They know the MMSI number of the boat. They'll make it a DSC call, because one of the things you can in the DSC call is you specify the working channel that the receiver is going to switch to. So magically it switches off the 16 and all that noise goes away. So there are a lot of uses for this, like if you have a fleet of boats, so like a commercial operation, you can get a group number, so you can call all of them at once and have a group call. But it's, again, I think it's useful to understand what the equipment is, how it can save your life, but it can only work if you understand and make sure it will operate when you need it. So again, any questions or comments?
Yeah, Graham, it's Chris Bobick.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a PLB in lieu of having an EPIRB. And for Lake Ontario, I was of the view that it's kind of a stopgap measure, the PLB, less expense. What's your view on it being as good as an EPIRB on Lake Ontario?
Oh, it's probably as good. It's good as an EPIRB.
Okay.
Okay. In other words, like an EPIRB is designed to automatically launch it when your boat sinks and a whole bunch of other stuff. The battery will run for much longer like that. I think the PLB battery is only 24 hours, while the EPIRB is 72. And if you're not rescued in 24 hours in Lake Ontario, well,
you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
thanks. Yeah.
Now that might not be such a good idea if you were going offshore cruising or racing.
Yeah, I just saw it as adequate enough for the Great Lakes.
Yep. Yep. So anybody else have any comments?
I was going to say, Graham, I've got the PLB as well. And when I've gone sailing out of the Great Lakes, I just go onto the site. I go into my area and I just update where my position is. And so it's, I just tell them where I'm sailing, where I'm going to, how long I'm going to be away for. So if it does go off, they're not thinking, oh, there's Kim in Port Credit, there's Kim down in Antigua. or something.
So is this a true PLB, or is it one of those things like from Spot or somebody?
It's a true PLB.
Okay. Because things like Spot or Garmin or whatever don't report directly to the search and rescue. They report to the company, who are then supposed to phone the search and rescue people. So that's great. So any other comments? Questions?
It's Paul Phillips here. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes, my boat has an EPIRB that came with it. The battery is expired. It's incredible challenge to find someone that will replace a battery on this. It's extremely, extremely expensive. Yet when I hit the test button every season, I get the email response back that it's working perfectly, but technically it's expired.
Right.
Do you have any suggestions on that?
Not really, but keep using it as long as you get the messages back. So the expiry date, the expiry date is what is set for commercial vessels that are mandated to have it. So the battery should last longer than that, because it should not expire before that.
Okay. Last time I checked, I went to about 6 or 8 places trying to find out who would replace the battery with not much success. And I think the cost was, $500 plus or something extreme like this for a battery replacement. So I haven't done it because it works perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's technically legal.
Well, you see,
That's
you're
another
not,
story.
you're not mandated to have an EPIRB.
Okay.
Okay. So so that's a difference. If you were like a commercial ship that needed one, yes, you would be in violation of the law.
Understand. Okay. I wasn't sure on the Lake Ontario races whether that's something that will be mandated at some point in the future. There's so many things, a year from now, this is going to come into place and a bunch of safety things, and it's getting a little extreme.
It probably will not be an EPIRB. It might be the man overboard or something like AIS, which is more attuned to Lake Ontario.
Understood. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Jeff Rula here. Just people who are considering going solo. In a couple of years' time, the Great Lakes GLSS will be mandating for solo sailors, racers, that they have AIS transponders on their boats. It's not immediate, but I think it's 2 years off that they're going to mandate it. So if you're considering entering the solo class, then it's something you might consider.
Yeah. So this was done, I think, to help meet the requirements to have a continuous lookout. So as I mentioned, it can give you an alarm. So if you set it so the closest point of approach is too close, it'll set you an alarm. So this is to help maintain a continuous lookout for the one solo sailor.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
Okay. Anything else anybody wants to bring up? Okay. Okay, I'm not sure if everybody realizes that you can get email navigation warnings. Some of them relate to radio services or telecommunication services go out of service and back in. And here is the website. And again, I'll be sending out the PDF later today or tomorrow to everybody that's here. So you can click on the link so you can subscribe to these. And again, if anybody's interested, we're always looking for volunteers at LOOR. So if anybody wants to help us, that's great. And just email us at that address. And thanks for attending. And again, for more information. And if you want to get our newsletter, you just have to sign up there. Rather than having the large, long URL, that's the simple one. So again, thank you. And I'll stick around if there's any more questions anybody has. But thank you for joining.
Thank you, Graham. Excellent job, as usual.
Thanks, Graham. Thanks, Caroline,
you,
for
Graham.
navigating.
Yeah.
Thank you, Graham. Excellent job.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Graham. Always appreciate your knowledge.
Mhm.
We're done. It's like on
It was supposed to be there.
the- it's not. I
The
don't
lead, you
know.
can't see the lead, it's behind the speaker. Down the right, in the lower corner.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn.
Oh, my pleasure, Graham. It's interesting for me.
Okay. Yeah, it's when I attended that seminar from the Chicago MAC that I discovered this little gotcha about the MOB device. And I don't,
Mhm.
it would be nice if they changed it so it'd be the same as the US, so it wasn't any confusion about what it did.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, everybody, and thank you.
Good night, Graham. Thanks for your work.
Yeah.